Hello, I'm Brendan Ozawa da Silva.
And I'm Michael Carlin, and we're the Associate Directors of the Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics at Life University. And we're here today to talk to you about compassionate integrity training. And this will be the first of 4 short videos that lay out the foundations of compassionate integrity training. Today is part 1, and we're going to be talking about what is compassionate integrity training. So I'm going to start by asking Brendan a question that people may be asking, which is, there are a lot of other compassion training programs out there. Why create a new one?
Why indeed. So Emory University and Stanford University both have great compassion training programs, and there are others out there as well. But we wanted to make a program that would be very accessible, very flexible, that could be tailored to different populations, and that also included certain elements that are not present in other compassion training programs, like especially the focus on the trauma-informed care and the resiliency skills that start in the body and the nervous system, and also systems awareness, a recognition of how we exist in systems. So Michael, why a program that incorporates both compassion and integrity?
It's a good question. A lot of people ask us that, which is one of the reasons we start this program with explaining that. And that is that integrity is going to be very critical if you want to create social, personal, and environmental flourishing. You have to be able to understand what are your values and how you act in accordance with those values. The problem is that integrity is not enough, because there are plenty of people throughout history and even in today's world where you have a tremendous amount of integrity. You know what your values are, you live according to those values. The problem is that those values are not ones that really embrace common humanity, not ones that try to bring equity and social justice into the world. And so we have to ground that integrity in compassion, in our natural biological orientation towards compassion, towards reciprocity, and towards kindness. So that's the reason we bring them both together.
So what are some of the components of compassion integrity training?
So compassion integrity training really deals on 3 different levels. We first deal with the individual, so we call that self-cultivation. And self-cultivation is made up of 4 components. The first is calming the body and mind. So we start with the body, and we use the body to help us calm our minds and calm our bodies. We then move from the body into our behavior and speech through what we call ethical mindfulness. We then move from our speech and actions into the thoughts and the mental states that are driving those speech and actions, and we call that emotional awareness. And then finally, with self-cultivation, we end with self-compassion. And self-compassion here is both self-kindness, which is really important, but it's also understanding what truly brings us happiness and what truly brings us difficulty and disappointment and suffering, and recognizing how we can shift the way we think in order to move more towards our own benefit, our own happiness, our own self-kindness, and away from that suffering. So one of the questions we get asked a lot, and I think it would be good for you to answer this, Brendan, is why do we start with the body?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the unique aspects of our program is that we draw a lot from trauma-informed research and trauma-informed care, and we start with the nervous system. Because if we want to work on our thoughts, our values, our emotions, compassion for ourselves and others, increasing our awareness of systems, we need to understand the way our bodies work, because our bodies can short-circuit all of that. When we get stressed, when we get excited, when we feel a threat to ourselves or to things we care about, our nervous system actually short-circuits all of that. And the most effective way of addressing that is not through trying to change the way we think or our emotions at the moment, because they're being driven by the body, but actually address it in the body itself through physical actions that we can do to bring about calmness. So we incorporate these skills of resourcing, grounding, help now strategies. These are immediate techniques we can use to kind of bring our body back to a place, to our natural resilience zone, as we call it, and then engage from that place. And it makes things much more effective. And if we want to do other things like meditate or do other practices, it's a lot easier if our body is relaxed and ready to do that.
So we move from the first domain, which is self-cultivation, and then we begin to move out to others and relating to others. And here in Series 2, we have 4 new skills, and those are impartiality and common humanity, forgiveness and gratitude. We build from forgiveness and gratitude into empathic concern, and then finally in this series, we have compassion. And one of the questions that a lot of people ask us, and so I'd be interested in your take on this, is why this order? Is there a method to the madness, so to speak?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So what we're trying to do is cultivate compassion for ourselves and for others who are around us. But it's quite easy for us to cultivate compassion for people that we already love and feel affection towards. And that's natural. In fact, that's something that we even share in common with other mammalian species. But the problems arise in terms of how we relate to people who are in our so-called outgroups. So how do we relate to people who are different to us, people on the other side of the world, people who don't seem like us? So in a way, bias prevents us from experiencing the same compassion and concern and respect for others outside our in-group. So we have to start by leveling the playing field and by reducing some of that bias, by recognizing how, of course, our loved ones, our friends and family are deserving of our compassion and respect, and we should have affection for them. But other people, their friends, their families, are also human beings just like us. So if we can, in some way, address that natural bias that we have, but that is in some ways can lead us to irrational behavior, then that can really help. And if we don't do that, then although we might be trying to live with integrity, in some cases we can even harm others or neglect the needs of others out of compassion for those in our in-group.
The question I get a lot too is people question about this idea of having compassion at the core, which we're going to talk about in our next video, but sometimes the issue is not a lack of compassion, it's a lack of impartiality. It's too much bias, right?
Right.
And then building from that common humanity and impartiality, we begin by trying to find forgiveness for others and by, again, bringing more people into our circle, the people that we've maybe shunned in the past, as well as creating greater gratitude, not only for those people that we know are doing things to benefit us, but the millions and potentially even billions of people out there that are benefiting us every day. Once we have that gratitude, we start to feel a sense of empathy towards people, because when we have intense gratitude for people, we immediately and naturally care about them and care about what they're feeling and what they're thinking, which then when we see them suffering initiates compassion. So to answer that question that we get a lot, there is a rational order to this program, and each skill builds upon the skill that you learned before it. So after we have dealt with self-cultivation and moved on to relating to others, the third and final series is engaging in systems. So Brendan, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a great and somewhat unique part of our program, which is that we have an explicit attention to systems. And without thinking about systems, if we just stayed on the personal and interpersonal levels, we might have compassion, we might have gratitude for each other, a sense of integrity, but we're missing the deeper structural issues that inform all of our lives. So if we really want to address social issues, if we want to think about issues like justice and equity, how to address issues of diversity, inclusion, and so forth, we have to think on a systems level. But in compassion and integrity training, we don't just think about a systems level in terms of institutions and policies. That's one aspect of systems. We also talk about the cultural ideas, beliefs, and practices that inform and perpetuate those institutional structures. And so we have to address those systems and understand how our identities are shaped by systems and how our well-being and lack of well-being is impacted by systems. So this is a very powerful and interesting part of our program.
Yeah, and so we do that through the teaching of two different skills. One is appreciating interdependence, and then the last one is actually engaging with discernment. And sometimes what we think of this as like the metaphor of a bird. On one wing of the bird is compassion, and that gives us the motivation to want to help alleviate the suffering of others. But sometimes we don't know what to do about it. And without the other wing, which is wisdom or discernment, we may actually cause harm through our actions, even though they may be motivated by compassion. So this whole section is really about figuring out how to find the best solutions to some of the problems that are going on in society and how to rectify some of these issues of inequity and social injustice.
So the way that we teach compassion integrity training is through activities and reflective practices. And there's a particular reason why we do it that way. Perhaps you could say a few words about that.
Sure. So we call this the 3 in 3 educational model. So the first part of the 3 is the 3 domains, which we just talked about, which is self, others, and systems. But we teach those through 3 different levels of knowledge. The first being what we call received knowledge, and that's just taking some content and delivering it. So it's taking information and conveying information. It's a very kind of basic pedagogical model for people for delivering information. The problem is it doesn't have much impact. People tend to not remember that. Some of it is important, so we have included that, but it's not really going to make the impact. The second level of knowledge is what we call critical insight. And critical insight are activities that enable people to take that received knowledge, work with it through their own personal experiences and their own activities, and come up with an aha moment of how this information actually matters to them in their life and what they want to do with it and how they want to change based on it. The problem is, as we all know, we have those aha moments all the time, and they're very short-lived, right? We go to a session, we experience something like that, we say we're going to change, but nothing actually changes. And so that's the third level of knowledge, which is the most important and deeply embedded into our framework, which is the embodied understanding. And so this is the series of practices, journal exercises, dialogue, mindful dialogue exercises that we've incorporated into the program to ensure that as you do this over time, you can really see those lasting changes. And then the embodied understanding takes part, and that's where it becomes automatic. That's where it becomes part of who you are. So one of the things you mentioned at the very beginning was why we developed this program was because we wanted to bring in trauma research, resiliency research. So maybe we can end this video by talking a little bit about what you mean by that and why it's so important and so much a part of what we're doing with CIT.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we're bringing in from trauma research is not just applicable to people who have suffered from big T trauma, but really it's applicable to all of us. If we have a nervous system, then we experience stress, we experience threats to our nervous system, threats to our livelihood. That could be getting into a car accident. It could be social threats, like our fear of embarrassment, or fear of failure, or looking bad in front of other people. All of this impacts us because we are social animals. We're social beings who rely on each other for our success and for our lives and our survival. So what we're doing is trying to bring in some of the science about our nervous system in practical tools. And there's been a shift that's happened in the trauma research world, which is going from a traditional view, which is viewing people as somehow defective when they do wrong things. You know, when people act in a wrong way, that there's something bad with them, they need to be punished as a result. And the question is, what's wrong with you? Towards a trauma-informed approach, which is saying, well, what happened to you? What affected you so that now you're behaving this way? You're dysregulated, or you can't, act appropriately in certain circumstances. But now there's a shift going from that trauma-informed view to an even broader view, which is a resiliency-informed view, which is not saying what happened to you, you're traumatized, now we need to help you and kind of fix you in a way, but to say what's going on with you is a natural outcome of having a nervous system, having an autonomic nervous system, having a survival response. And what you're actually exhibiting is resiliency to stress. But we can build on those skills. We can enhance your resiliency so that no matter what situations you encounter, whatever types of adversity, you're using those skills to overcome those situations. So it's a strengths-based approach rather than a kind of stigmatizing approach of saying, you have PTSD. It's also a very universal approach because it says that these skills and this understanding is not just for people who have quote unquote traumatized, but they're for all of us and useful for all of us. So that's the kind of body-based universal approach that we take.
That's great, and I think it also underscores another thing that we talk about a lot, which is none of the skills that we teach in CIT are skills that we don't use every day, every one of us. These are things that we naturally are able to do. The question is just how often we use them and how good we are at using them and how do we increase our ability to use them more effectively. So that brings us to the end of our first video, which is why CIT. And next video is going to be part 2 of the foundational concepts, which is about the first fundamental shift.